Good morning and welcome to a very special episode of Mental Health Matters. Now, this is the show where we do a deep dive into all things mental health and well-being, and this is our very first 2-hour quarterly special. For this show, we have taken the topic of domestic abuse. Now, sadly, it was one of our most popular, if that is the right word to use, topics when we covered it on the show. And it's the one that generated the most comments. It's the one that clearly needs the most awareness raising. And the way that we're going to deal with this today is that we do have some very brave guests who have shared their life experiences. We have experts at the top of their field who are able to discuss those experiences, look at the causes, look at the behaviours, but also look at the ways that we can help with healing. And so today you're going to have a jam-packed couple of hours to support you if you're going through this sort of experience, so you can support somebody else if they are going through this sort of experience, but also to really recognise what to look out for, because sadly, this is a topic that is not going to go away. Let's meet our panel. Ladies, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here. If you don't mind, I'm going to just go around each of you and ask you to introduce yourself and to talk a little bit about your link to domestic abuse. So let's start with yourself, Ronia.
Hi, I'm Ronia Fraser. I'm a multi-award-winning trauma recovery coach and clinical hypnotherapist, and I'm one of the leading experts in the field of narcissistic abuse recovery, which means I work with abuse survivors from all over the world, and I help them get back on their feet, regain their mental health, and recover who they were always meant to be.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Ronia. And Jennifer.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Mckenzie. I'm a somatic and holistic trauma coach, and I help people from all walks of life recover from traumatic experiences, including abuse, childhood sexual abuse, and really help them to release the trauma from the body and regain their confidence, so they can really rediscover themselves. And I am an abuse survivor myself.
Thank you. And Madina?
Yeah, my name is Madina Demirbas. I'm a sex therapist, a couple therapist, and a writer, and the author of Udemy course, which is called The Psychology of Sex and Relationships. That's the recent one. I work with individuals and with couples from different parts of the world. Recently, it's been a lot of international marriages that I'm dealing with, because I am in one. My link to the domestic abuse is that I grew up with a cousin who was going through this abuse for about 10 years, and I got to observe her very closely. And that's one of the reasons why I became a therapist, because I could see that the help that we were offering to her was not really helpful.
Yeah, no, gosh. Thank you very, very much. We are going to go straight over to our first guest. Now, this is somebody who was willing to share their experience with us. However, her words are read by an actor.
I was introduced to the person at the age of 15. At the time, I was told that he was a friend of the family, and so instantly there was trust there. I was there. It wasn't just me. There was my sister and his daughter, and we were out on a balcony and looking up at the stars. It was a beautiful, clear evening, and I was pointing out different star constellations to her, and it was just, one of those moments where, I love children, always have done, and, I was just bonding with this little girl, and she was really lovely. He then went off and had a conversation with my parent, and, we were all just having a laugh and a good evening, and then it was proposed to me that would I like to babysit his daughter, and I'd got on really well with her, and I didn't see a reason why I shouldn't. So it was suggested that I go that evening to his place, where it was arranged that I would sleep in the same room as his little girl, give us a chance to bond, and see if we got on well. And then we get to his house, and all of a sudden the arrangement that had been made started to change quite quickly. So it's bedtime, I'm helping her get ready for bed, and she's all excited, and I'm just about to climb into the room and lay down and go to sleep, when he automatically then says that I need to go in his room. And I instantly think, well, this isn't what's been arranged, and alarm bells go off a bit, but I don't want to be rude. I've been brought up to be polite and look after, do as I'm told. And so despite feeling uncomfortable, I do. I go into his room, and it was just bizarre. I don't know, I was just so shy and taken aback, but I didn't want to appear rude. And it escalated from there. Slowly it went from working weekends, only going on the weekends, to slowly becoming living there practically. He's then telling me what I can wear, what I can't wear, what to eat, what not to eat, what to drink, what not to drink. My whole life is practically dictated by this one person. It's hard. Like, I hid it for so long, and then the minute I spoke to my best friend's parents about it, it was like a new door had opened. And it was like a total new chapter, and I think you've got to see it that way.
So thank you so much to our guest who was willing to stand up and share their experience. It's very difficult to do, and of course to the actor who read her words. Ronia, let's start with you. How common is the sort of grooming experience that we've heard when it comes to abuse, and why is it so easy for us to just let it go and just kind of go, oh, maybe it's me?
Well, the grooming experience actually happens in any kind of domestic abuse context, because obviously what we've heard, she was very young, so yes. That's oftentimes what we refer to as grooming, because people are impressionable and obviously don't have the life experience, don't have the knowledge, don't have the tools to know better, which is a big part of the grooming process. But even when people are older, in their adult years, grooming still happens consistently. If we think of love bombing, for example, and it really is anything that's designed to break down the barriers, right, and create this trust, and it can come in so many different shapes and forms. Yes, of course, when somebody is young, but just because you're in your mid-30s doesn't mean you're not susceptible to grooming. It just might come in a very different form, because at the end of the day, it plays with our deepest insecurities, our biggest fears, and that's also where the trap is. And when it happens to you, you obviously don't even realize, because you're just so happy that somebody sees you that way, that somebody says those things to you. And obviously abusers are very, very good in finding out exactly what it is that strokes your ego that you're so desperate for.
I see the panel nodding. Is there anything you'd like to add as well?
Yeah, I think, it really does. They're so clever and observant, and they will be observing you, they'll be researching you, behind the scenes as well, and looking at your reactions to things. They're so acute and clever that they will be delving into those deepest, darkest insecurities, like you say. Exactly. And then they might not do it at the time, but later down the line they will turn around and use that against you.
Yeah. I mean, it almost sounds like this is the behaviour of a stalker. If you were doing this for a stranger, people would say that's really odd behaviour, and yet in that relationship, you almost just don't see that happening.
Well, you also need to keep in mind that you volunteer a lot of information yourself, right? Because if somebody comes in, and it comes in under the pretense of really true love and deep trust, so your guards come down, and because they pretend to share similar experiences, similar insecurities, similar fears, so the trust isn't built over time as it should be, but it's pretty much instant. So what happens is that you volunteer a lot of information vulnerable information because you found somebody who gets it, and then of course, as you said, they will just turn around and use it against you at a later stage.
And sort of relating to that vulnerability, Jen, in an article about abuse and neurodiversity I read, Enhance, the UK, they wrote, while anyone can be a victim of abuse, research shows that those who are neurodiverse may have a heightened risk of violence, bullying or controlling behaviour. Now, our guest has said that we're allowed to say she's diagnosed with ADHD now as an adult, but how might the behaviours of a neurodiverse person impact their actions in that risky situation?
So neurodivergent, you know, we're talking about ADHD, autistic spectrum, also dyslexia, dyscalculia, dyspraxia. So these are the things that range of a neurodivergent person. And typically, someone who is undiagnosed or unaware, then they are subjected to more negative feedback, which leads to more low self-esteem. So then when someone comes along and they show an interest, then that is then it's feeding to their connection. You know, they want that connection, and someone's bigging them up. You know, you're great, you're this or that, and it's like, oh, somebody actually gets me. And then, like you said, the similarities that they lie about a lot. You know, oh, I like that too. You know, you think, oh, someone gets me. Then you get that deeper connection. So low self-esteem can contribute to this, and also a neurodivergent person can take more time to process information, so they can say, oh yeah, and they agree to that, but then afterwards they've gone, oh, actually that didn't feel good for me. So consent can come into this as well. So they can consent to something or think that they've consented to something when actually their processing takes a lot longer. And then afterwards, on reflection, then they're like, well, no, actually I didn't like that, or that didn't feel good for me. Which then can lead to shame and guilt, and them actually holding that in. So a higher risk of substance abuse as well, which can then impair judgment. So you're not even realising that you're getting into an abusive situation or a dangerous situation of sexual abuse or even rape. So the impulsivity as well, the dopamine seeking. You know, if someone comes along and they're exciting, you know, we can be blinkered into wanting that. I could actually talk about this kind of all day, and manipulators are very clever.
Yes,
you know, and they will spot that. And we're more likely to engage in risk-taking behaviour, so we cannot see the dangers of what's in front of us.
Why might sexual attraction, that dopamine hit, that love at first sight, that feeling of thrill, be so problematic in domestic abuse cases?
Talking about excitement and the sexual attraction, we need to look at how it was formed in childhood. And they're not, you know, usually it is formed by a parental figure, but we also look at the environment that a person grew up with, and if the environment is full of abuse, then abuse becomes the norm, and it becomes the form where people feel alive, actually. The abusive environment, when they actually feel them so that they exist, because in abusive environments, usually the children are ignored. They don't feel that they are there, but it's only when it is dangerous and at the edge, and that they start feeling their bodies and they feel that they exist, which is very similar to sexual attraction, because at the end of the day, it's about feeling alive and feeling excited and thrilled and going after things. So I think in that sense, sadly, this is what the victims themselves are looking for without even realizing. And it's very similar to the drug abuse and to substance abuse, because even though you know that this is wrong for you and you shouldn't be seeking it, but it gives you something that otherwise you wouldn't be able, the dopamine hit.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm always interested, if I wish there would be a chance, for us to have rather also a brain image of the people, because that would give a very different picture. We tend to blame the victims and, you should have left, you should have seen that. No, very often because of trauma, for example, the prefrontal cortex has been damaged already. And with this, and what this area, brain area is responsible for is for decisions making in the long term. So very often the victims are already, their brains, they not are damaged, but their brains are damaged in a way, and they are not even capable sometimes to really evaluate the situation in the long run. It really feels good and exciting and alive and, something, where they feel like they exist.
So this relates to sort of having that conditioning. Your environment has conditioned you, your upbringing has conditioned you, and that doesn't matter how old you are, it doesn't matter what your neurodivergence is, it's that experience. Do you mind sharing a little bit more about conditioning?
Sure. I mean, obviously there is something that the abuser offers which draws us in. And that's why whether you're neurodivergent, whether you're neurotypical, at the end of the day, it comes down to, okay, so what is it actually that I was so desperate for to have? And because they are so observant, they will present on the golden platter exactly what has been missing our whole life. But because at that point, we're not even aware of that because it's all in the unconscious. That's why we walk into this trap. So very oftentimes, and we already talked about, oh my God, finally somebody sees me, somebody hears me, somebody understands me. And because they really, make us out to be so amazing, which we actually are, but because we don't believe it ourselves, we are so dependent on this external validation. That's, of course, where the trap then comes in. And that's also then what they turn around and take away. So then if we, for example, have a faulty program running in the background unconsciously, that we have fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, not being good enough, not feeling good enough, which is actually a very universal faulty program that both men and women have running in the background. Those are those kind of things we need to explore to find out what is it that they actually offered me, and then run an update on this program, which we can actually really nicely do and much easier than people understand, because that way what happens is the healing happens from the inside out, which means the external validation falls away. So then the next time somebody like that, comes along, dangles that carrot in front of our nose, we actually are not interested. And that's the only way how we can break the pattern, because pretty much everybody who has been in a situation like that knows this isn't the first time. It has happened before. And but for me, it was like, okay, so the realization even, actually this wasn't the first time, it was just the worst time. And it was so bad that, it brought me to my knees, and it really forced me to look at myself. And that's where the conditioning obviously comes in.
Yes, and Jen, this is the work that you do as well, is this healing from within.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to ask you first, another point that the guest raised was she had an attachment to the child she was babysitting. She cared about the child. She didn't want to leave the child. And so how, when you have family, how do you balance that?
Yeah. So often in these situations, you care about the people that are around you. So this is sometimes when, say, someone is in a marriage or a long-term relationship, that they don't often seek help or get out because of the fear around maybe losing the children or upsetting the children, or they've even got that belief that they have to stay because of the children, and that attachment to people around you. Often then, if you've got that low self-esteem and that fear of abandonment and stuff, you're not going to want to break away from that. And that can be running on those subconscious, unconscious programs that we're unaware of until we're away from that situation, and then we can begin to actually heal and process it, because you're going to be either in shutdown or you're going to be in fight or flight. You're going to be trying to survive, and you're not going to be making conscious, aligned decisions about your situation whilst you're in it. So often then the realisation comes, and then the situation changes, and then that's when the healing starts to happen, when you've taken that step back and you begin to then process what actually is going on here, what's an abusive relationship, and how can I change this?
I'm really hearing that survival side of things, because and it's also that survival instinct for your children or the people that you care about within that situation, that you feel you are the protector of. Madina, are there any specific red flags to watch for behaviourally or sexually when it comes to abuse, or the beginning of abuse, and how can we deal with them if we notice any?
I can tell many red flags. I'm not sure that it will work, because like we mentioned earlier, because of the programming and because of sometimes even neurological connections that we have in our brain, it is almost useless for me to tell about that, because intellectually it's not about, nobody makes an intellectual choice to get into abusive relationships, but rather it is something much, much deeper and unconscious. Nevertheless, I can name these red flags. Something that I always pay attention to is I force them to answer the question over and over: how do you feel next to this person? Because what abusers do is they sweep off your feet and they take your awareness of yourself. They take your awareness of who you are. And you end up talking about this person over and over. He's so handsome, he's so smart, he's so amazing, and so on. And then I'm like, okay, what about you? How do you feel next to them? And they're like, yeah, I'm fine. But he, oh my God, So if you find yourself constantly talking, thinking about another person, and feeling like the ground under yourself have been taken away, then maybe it's a sign. Most likely you will interpret it as love and attraction and passion, but just in case, double check with a specialist, because that's what abusers are very good at taking up your space. And I have experienced it myself recently. I was lucky enough to understand it on the spot. It's like all my boundaries, all of my understanding of who I am just was taken away. And I was ready to do anything and to share all the information. And, even though I'm 37 years old and I'm a therapist with 20 years of experience, that can really happen. But my knowledge about psychopaths and about users helped me. And I said, wait a minute, this doesn't really feel right.
That's a really good point, because I think this can happen professionally as well as personally.
Absolutely.
So we're not just talking about sexual abuse or coercion or in an intimate relationship. This can happen in the workplace as well.
Another red flag that I find useful is when you start feeling inferior next to this person, when out of a sudden he is just at the top of the mountain and you feel like you're being made and favor a beautiful honor that you were, it's me, and out of a sudden that, I think this sense of inferiority would be a red flag, which you normally don't have.
So red flags to look out for would be comments about your appearance, starting to say, why are you going out dressed like that? Well, are you really wearing that? So this is how it starts, making comments about your appearance, maybe saying, well, why are you talking to that person? They'll slowly start to bring you away from your friends, your family, and start to feed you with negative beliefs about the people around you, making you not be able to trust them. So what they want to do is isolate you. Maybe they're going to try and change the way you look, change the things that you wear. Jealousy is one to look out for as well.
That's exciting, jealousy, just sort of adding on to there, because when someone's jealous, you go, oh, he's jealous of me,
This person is jealous.
But that can obviously is a problem. Jealousy in a healthy relationship, it looks very different to one in an unhealthy, toxic even abusive relationship. So those are the things that I would look out for. Love bombing, constantly ringing you, texting you, where are you, questioning, what are you doing? There's a difference between caring about you got home safely than wanting to know where you are all of the time. So they're the ones that, from me, to look out for.
Just onto that, I think the most important thing is if something feels wrong, you don't actually need to know what it is. If something feels wrong, it's because it is. And as we said, because the actual trap isn't processed in the cognitive function, that's literally all you need to know. Because for everything else, you find excuses anyway. So really listen to what's going on here in your solar plexus area. And without knowing the answer, this is literally all you need to know in any kind of those situations.
I would add to that, in any situation. Your body, because your nervous system, your body's always talking to you, like, are you listening?
We're now going to go over to Lucinda Jones. She is a domestic abuse community ambassador, and she's going to be talking to us about intersectionality, the barriers that some people face when they're trying to report or get support for domestic abuse.
What happens with domestic abuse is that there's a whole load of secrecy around it, and it's happening all around us, and we don't talk about it very often. The amount of people that are affected by it is staggering amount of people. It's 1.7 million people a year, I think, are affected by domestic abuse. So basically what happens is that communities are the first people that tend to find out when something is happening to someone. And so therefore the idea behind it is communities rising, is that because we will be safe people to speak to, we talk about it more, and signposts to support survivors when they seek help. Often you find that the person they go to, they say, look, oh my God, I'm going through this terrible ordeal right now. I don't know what to do. It doesn't feel right. I'm not really sure if it is what it is. It just doesn't feel quite right. And more commonly than not, then the response that person receives is not very helpful whatsoever. And they're known as gate closers because it will prevent them from, it's sort of dismissive. And it feels a bit scary because, like, if someone's coming to talk to you about that, you go, oh my God, this awful thing, I don't want that to happen. And if I pretend it's not happening, then I undermine what they're saying, go, oh no, I think you're mistaken. He's such a nice guy. He does this, he's great, he's fabulous, blah, blah, blah. Are you sure you haven't understood this? Which is one of the big tricks in society, actually. But the aim is that the survivor, when they speak to someone, the aim is that first person will be the first step to taking first steps to safety. So instead of they figured out that when a survivor speaks out and they speak to someone, it's generally they will speak to 7 different people before they get a useful response that's a helpful response. So with regards to domestic abuse, it's a very gendered crime in first place. Survivors tend to be female, perpetrators tend to be male. It's not to say that's the only way, but it is how it is tend to be most of all. And women aren't believed when they speak out. When you add into this intersectionality, so it's the interconnecting nature of all the categories that we might fall into. So when you bring in things like age and gender and race, disability, class, sexuality, nationality, or all these other things that that make us, then it adds even more barriers. It creates even more of a problem. With regards to, so according to the UN Women, individuals from marginalised communities are likely to face more barriers in accessing adequate assistance. And so there are studies highlighting disparity and accessing support for survivors with intersecting identities. So with regards to domestic abuse, we already know it's very gendered. So then you've got these other factors as well. So what's really important is that you listen to voices from people that don't experience life exactly the same as you. So I'm very aware right now, I'm on your show and I have what I am talking from my perspective. And I need to make sure that I am not talking on behalf of other people. So one of the things I wanted to sort of highlight first of all is that I listened to a podcast called Spotlight, which is about domestic abuse, and they often have different people speaking on it. And they had this amazing woman called Ngozi Fulani, and she has set up something called Sister Space. So that's Sister, SISTAH space. And it's a community-based initiative that supports African heritage women. In this podcast, she was saying that because she works with survivors, and she's often taking survivors to like the police station to go and report crimes and stuff, how she finds herself treated is not how other people would be treated, but because she will sort of fight further than if you were the survivor by yourself, going there saying this is what's happening, and you were told, oh no, the person that deals with this is not in right now, you have to come in another time, or you have to come, go to that police station, they've got more people that actually deal with domestic abuse, stuff like that. So already there's a barrier in itself, like you're going to help and then being denied it. And I think one of the things that really stood out to me was she was saying that when she was with one survivor and speaking to a police officer, the police officer said, well, I can't see any bruises on you. So there's a whole host of different things happening with that thing. I mean, first of all, domestic abuse isn't just physical. We know that there's multiple ways that domestic abuse happens. And that's why we use the words domestic abuse, not domestic violence, which used to be the term, because coercive control is part of that. But also, so there might not be bruises, but also he's also referencing her black skin as well, which just, it's such an awful, blinkered, daft thing to respond to. And other things that Ngozi said was that she, within her community, she said that actually there's often a lot of shame about talking about problems, because this whole thing about being a strong black woman is also not on other people. It's not other people's jobs to educate you either. So like I said, very clearly, I have gone to look for these different sources, and I was, because the people that do my training at RISE are very knowledgeable about all of these things. So advocacy with only reflecting experiences of some women will fail to achieve equality. So another aspect is disability. Now, my trainer at RISE happens to be the specialist in disability. That is her specialist area as well. So disabled women are twice as likely to experience domestic abuse as women who are able-bodied. But also I found this really interesting as well, that there's disabled men also experience higher rates of abuse than non-disabled men, but also disabled men tend to experience abuse at the same rate as non-disabled women. And I was like, oh, that's terrible. That's awful. I mean, all of this is awful. And I have to say, there's an aspect of this, like, this is a really bleak subject. It really is. But it's so empowering to be informed about it and to know about these things and to be able to talk comfortably with people about these things as well. So so Dr. Jackie Barron from Women's Aid explained that with regards to disability, she said that we've had cases where a woman's wheelchair was removed just as she was about to sit down, and hearing aids thrown to the other side of the room, leaving the victim unable to communicate. Because if you're a disabled person, the likelihood is that your carer is your partner. That's the most likely situation, which then gives them a lot of power because you are reliant on them in so many ways just to access life in general. And also there's this whole aspect of like, oh my God, isn't he wonderful? He spends his time looking after her when she needs help, and like, oh my God, he can do no wrong. So if when she tries to speak out, then people generally are being dismissive of that and focus on the fact that he does care. Well, yeah, has the role of carer. And another aspect of this, which I thought was really interesting, which again isn't like unless you are living as a disabled person, perhaps you won't necessarily automatically think this, is that if you're a disabled person and you want to escape from your abuser, then the odds are that your house perhaps has been adapted because you are disabled. Perhaps you're a wheelchair user, perhaps you just had additional needs in different ways. Then that means if you leave, if someone wants to leave and they were going to stay somewhere else, that's tricky enough. But if you add the access needs as well, then that's a whole lot whole lot of things to deal with. So another really amazing service is that there's something called Sign Health. And Sign Health is a specialist domestic abuse service, which supports deaf people and uses sign language to communicate. Which I just think, I love the fact that there's enough good people in the world that these things are being created, and that makes us, there's the little beacon of hope. And there's another one I want to tell you about called Hourglass. Now, this is one I've had a small amount of involvement in, because when you're a domestic abuse community ambassador, when someone comes to you and says, I'm experiencing this and I don't know what to do, then that is called a disclosure. And I've had a few disclosures. I've had hundreds of people tell me about events in the past that's happened to them. But I've had 3 official disclosures, which are things they're being abused at that point, and they actually came to me for help or to someone to speak to and be able to listen and believe. So Hourglass is for older people. So on the website, they say 1 in 6 older people are victims of abuse. So that's over 16% of our mothers and fathers and aunties and uncles and grannies and things. That's a huge amount. That's such a big amount. And the reason I'm familiar with them is because one of the people that came forward to me is an older lady. And I was aware that here where I live, our local library has Hourglass. They have a person that works for Hourglass in the library in the little room upstairs. On every Monday at 10:30 to 12:30. So there's also a support group or a support organisation called Gallup. I know about abuse. I understand what happens. I believe all survivors. But the important thing is you just want to sort of share information, because the more people talk about this, the more known it is that it's happening all the time, the more we'll spot signs and the more we can help.
When you already feel inferior or you already feel a bit of an outcast, this can actually affect your ability to report. I mean, if you're feeling inferior anyway, if someone is playing on how you feel in general. But how can that impact us if we're just not wanting to come forward, we're not wanting to say anything? Why do we just hold back?
One of our basic needs is connection as human beings. We want to be seen, we want to be heard. And often then, when we have low self-esteem, a lot of neurodivergent people can feel like they're an outcast already, which I've mentioned before, in those feelings of loneliness. But also what prevents us from coming forward, we've got to look at the emotional driver of our behaviour. What reward are we actually getting from staying in these situations? Because our actions aren't always governed by positive outcomes. We can stay in chaotic situations because we're getting an emotional reward, and that's what as human beings we're driving for, and which often then prevents us from coming forward. Because we want that connection, we don't want to be alone. We think, if we do this, we're going to be all alone again, right? Another thing that stops us is the fear of not being believed. And unfortunately, this happens so much, and it's something that I'm passionate about, that we keep needing to come forward and speaking up, using our voices together, and as individuals, and not even realising. It's one of the reasons we're not coming forward. I don't realise that we're in this type of relationship because we haven't had that education around what's healthy and what isn't. Yeah, exactly. And internalising emotions and feelings. So we think that, I can't tell anyone, the shame around it. There's so many drivers where we don't take that stand and go forward. So how can you help yourself if you find yourself in this situation? Is I'm big on self-awareness, understanding your brain and your body and your nervous system and what's actually going on in here, and in here is a big part of what I do and what I talk about, and get to know your beautiful brain and body. Research abuse. Now, there is the Freedom Programme that I took part in many years ago that actually really helped me to understand what actually is abuse and what's a healthy connection, what's a healthy boundary as well. So that is free and it's available to do. Keeping a record of the abuse, keeping a journal. If you are in an abusive relationship, you'll need to keep this well hidden, because that can then lead to more consequences. So make sure that you've got somewhere that you can hide this, your record of what happens when, how you feel, and keep a record of the abuse. That is going to help your case if and when you do take that to the authorities. So have an advocate you can trust. Trust is very important. Someone that you know you can trust. Maybe that's a friend, maybe that's a family member, or a member of an organisation. You know, seek professional advice. That's somebody that knows what they're talking about, that can actually really help you from that point of view, and you can actually get an advocate to go with you to make a statement as well.
I think that's a very key point about going for help with somebody who understands an abusive situation, because I think so often it can be easily dismissed if they don't.
They can help you converse that and communicate that in the right way, that you're going to get seen, you're going to get heard, and you get listened to.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, absolutely. And Ronia, I wanted to ask specifically about something Lucinda had mentioned about when your carer is your abuser, because then you feel you can't leave at all because you are so dependent already. You might also feel that inferiority that Madina was speaking about, because they care for me, they want to have sex with me as well. That's another thing that people feel. And so how can that mindset almost lead to additional abuse? And again, what could we do?
Well, in situations like that, it becomes even more tricky, because when people think about narcissists, they think about people that, you know, are so full of themselves, it's all about them. But then obviously all of a sudden you have somebody who on the outside looks very caring, very empathic, but in reality, obviously they are not, because they're taking advantage of a very vulnerable situation. But then that, of course, makes it even more difficult for the person on the receiving end to come forward, because that illusion is very intentionally created, right? So then you speak up about them and nobody believes it, because they're such nice people, because others can't even comprehend that they would do anything like that. And I think that's also very important to understand when we talk about abusers, because they very rarely are the people that we would think they are, because they are not very outward, you know, they're becoming much more smarter as well. So then it's actually not the person we think would do something to someone, but it's somebody who is very caring, who's very engaged in the community, who's very charitable. But of course, there is an agenda to it, right? So it's still about them, and it's still about getting something out of it for them. But on the outside, they're looking like they're very sacrificing themselves for the sake of others.
I see this a lot, covert narcissists hiding behind spirituality, hiding behind even therapists.
Definitely.
That scares me. That scares me how every one of us went,
It's everywhere. Covert
Especially
narcissists
now,
are hiding within our closest people, and that's scary. So being clued up about, like, we hear this word bandied around so much, and they're a narcissist and all this stuff, but actually educate yourself about what that actually is.
And it's very rarely what you think. What you think it is, and especially now when trauma has become such a thing, such a buzzword. There's a lot of self-help gurus and therapists and business people that actually latch onto this whole thing, because obviously when you're in a vulnerable situation, you're looking for help, you want to get better, you want to survive, literally. But then, of course, that makes you very susceptible if they, again, offer the right carrot.
Because also then financial abuse comes from that, like as covert narcissists, when they're preying on the vulnerabilities. I've seen it in the coaching industry where actually people are making or advising people to take out loans and credit cards so they can pay for their overpriced shit courses.
I was sorry. We could do a whole show on this, seriously, and I think we need to. I just need to go to Madina, just to pull out another point there on that Lucinda said, which was on LGBTQ plus relationships, because that's, again, an area we don't always talk about when it comes to abuse. So how might abuse manifest in that situation?
Well, first of all, it's underreported. Let's start with that. Very often the members of the LGBTQ plus community would choose not to go to police or to any other agencies because they don't necessarily want to disclose their sexuality, because once they tell the story, they need to tell the full story about their sexual orientation and so on. And because that prevents, that's number one thing why it is underreported. And secondly is because what from my clients have told me, we don't want to give bad name to LGBT class community. Now that we finally, our voices are heard and we've been recognized, we don't want to give a bad PR by saying that there's a lot of violence, so very often they would withhold this information. But one of the ways that abuse happens and abuse starts in this community is by outing control. And one of the partners would feel like they're more at ease and they would know that their partner is not. And they would threaten by disclosing this information, knowing that it could lead to even further isolation and so on. So that is one of the abuse. And then again, like I said, we don't have enough statistics. We do know that it does happen, the domestic abuse. And because another really sad thing that was striking for me is because of the way that the community members have been raised with shame and guilt about who they are and so on. They sort of internalize that there's something wrong and that they need punishment for that. So once the abuse happens, it is sort of like, it's sort of like a natural punishment, natural course of things. That's really awful. But there are organizations that are specializing on the community, but rather few. It's mostly about heterosexual women experiencing the domestic violence.
Yes. Oh my goodness. There really is so much to unpack here. We are going to be talking now about healing, and we do say goodbye to some of our experts, but they will be back on new shows. And I really do think it's important to talk about therapists and abuse, because I think that is a very key aspect. But just before we move to the break, what happens when you report, but you're told you're dismissed? Don't be silly. He's not like that's almost a secondary form of abuse there by the people who are supposed to help you. How do you recover from that? Let's just go from Madina, Jen, and Ronia. So that dismissal. How do you find the strength to keep going?
I think it was mentioned earlier by Jen and by you as well, Ronia, that it's about the feeling it in your body first and trusting your body. And I think, especially when you grow up, the idea came up to me. If you grow up as a neurodivergent or autistic, people normally wouldn't believe you. Oh no, it's not that loud. Or no, it's not that bad. Or no, it's not this, that. So you sort of are conditioned into believing that your reality is not true. So, sort of probably learning to question their questioning. And to getting back to how does it feel in your body when you say these things, when you experience these things. That could be one of the ways to support yourself. But obviously, the more people are aware, and I know there's a lot of shame, but the more social support you can get. Sometimes just one therapist or specialist or friend, but the more people you feel are backing you up, the easier it is to approach the authorities and to state your truth.
Thank you, Jen.
So when you are taking your experiences and your abuse to authorities, that's brave. I firstly want to say, well done. And that is really brave to be able to take that next step. So you're already going to be in a fragile way because of the abuse and the knocking down of your confidence and self-esteem. So, but then to be rejected then by authorities, and this happened to me personally, it's going to reinforce a belief about yourself that you don't matter. This is why taking an advocate is really going to help you. So in my experience, I made 3 statements against my last perpetrator, and he used the mental health card against me. And there's, I had 3 separate statements with physical injury, hospitalisation on the last one, concussion, and damage to my neck. And unfortunately, the CPS didn't pick it up after 3 attempts, and I felt angry. I was mad. I did shout at the police officer.
That doesn't help, does it?
I was angry. I was like, why aren't people believing me? And one of my children was a witness to some of this, and they didn't want to take a statement because of the age. And the neighbours actually heard the noise and the screaming and stuff. And this is what needs to change.
Yes.
For me, that's what needs to change. There needs to be more done from higher up.
In educating
we're doing what we can on the ground here, but it needs to come from the top down now.
Yeah.
And more people need to be advocating, to fundraising, and to be banging on the doors that are going to be the people in power to make those changes.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, and those situations make you then look like the crazy woman, right? And that's exactly what's intended.
That's what they want.
And then that's, you are unstable, and then that works against you, even though your reaction is a perfectly normal reaction to an incredibly abnormal situation, right? So, yeah. Well, I would recommend, because obviously the legal system is set up very narcissistically, and police as well. Like, you have to get really, really lucky. I, on one occasion, was lucky where I was believed straight away. My drink was spiked and I overdosed on it, and the police actually believed me without any proof. Apart from that, that's not the norm. So you're very likely to experience this rejection, and it's very, very difficult. But I think, especially now that we talk about it more, there are more resources available. So it goes back to getting an advocate, right? So now it's much more easy to actually find a lawyer or like a divorce consultant who is aware of narcissistic abuse and what it means. A counselor to help through the realization that this is what actually is happening, and working out a escape plan. Your in-depth healing you can't do at this stage, because actually when you do your healing before you have your legal, your court hearing, it's likely that they won't believe you, because you don't portray what they want to see as a victim. And I actually sometimes have to send survivors away, and they have to come back because I cannot help them neutralize what I have experienced, because then they would be sitting there and they would be calm and collected and very factually talk about what happened, and then they are not convincing as victims.
That's awful, isn't it? That just shows the system needs to be changed. Oh my goodness.
Absolutely.
It could be a whole other show. We are going to say goodbye to some of our experts. We're now going to go over to our resident psychologist, Dr Meg Arroll, to talk about the lasting effects of trauma, but also how to show some self-compassion.
The thing about domestic abuse, which sometimes people who haven't experienced it find very difficult to understand, is that it's cumulative, and it's insidious in this way because it can start very slowly and be very subtle and build up over time. So it's not obvious to other people. And we as individuals, we oftentimes want to make the best out of situations, and ourselves not realizing that perhaps this is an abusive situation. And the way coercive control works is that it starts off with those small little bits of controlling behavior. Oh, you're not going out wearing that, are you? And then can build into something more serious, although any type of controlling behaviour in that way, it is coercive and it is a form of domestic abuse. Now, other things often go on in these abusive situations are control over finances. And that's one thing that perhaps we don't talk about enough, is financial control and abuse. Someone taking over all the financial affairs, and at the time that may seem great, you know, I don't have to worry about money. But actually, over time you may realise, well, you know what, if I wanted to leave this relationship, it could be very, very hard. And many survivors report that they had no access to money, so there are no escape routes in that sense. And of course, the emotional toll and the emotional abuse that again can just percolate over time, affecting our sense of self-esteem and self-worth, so that we may become convinced that, you know what, he or she is right, no one else would ever have me, so what options do I have? Now, again, if you just took a picture of this situation, it might be hard to see in a snapshot, but you look over the course of time and see that type of domestic abuse accumulating to where an individual doubts themselves, has very low confidence, perhaps has become quite isolated because the partner would criticize friends or family. And so again, all these doors are shut down to an individual. And so it can make it very, very challenging to exit that type of situation and relationship. Now, even after a survivor has left and rebuilt their lives and really feel quite grounded in their new life, things can happen that activate that sense of insecurity, that fear response, because our brain wants to keep us so safe. Those memories, those associations will be very much embedded. So oftentimes I see clients that will say, well, you know what, I dealt with that, I processed it, I had therapy, I'm really taking care of myself, but actually it's starting to bubble up again. Those feelings of insecurity, those feelings of low self-worth. And it may be that during life that gets busy, there'll be some associations that are just reminding us of that time. And so in that sense, emotional health is just like physical health, and it is beneficial to, you know what, do a bit of an MOT, do a bit of a top up, and think about, you know, how can I start to really maintain that level of resilience? And there is absolutely no shame in starting to feel some of those insecurities again, because as human beings, we have many different demands on our lives. Attached to that oftentimes is a very profound feeling of shame. Shame that we allowed ourselves to be in this situation. And so again, recognizing that it is cumulative, that these situations develop over time, and that is why they can be hidden in plain sight to such a degree. And a book that I find incredibly useful is It's Not You, It's What's Happened to You. And this is about this type of complex trauma, which we call, and some treatment strategies. And one incredibly important strategy is to develop or redevelop that sense of self-compassion. We talk about self-love so much of the time, and it can be hard. It can be really hard when we've been in a very destructive relationship, because we can feel like, well, gosh, if someone treated me like that, maybe that's what I'm worth. So the precursor to self-love is self-compassion. When we start to feel those feelings of shame or guilt, to just imagine, bring to mind a close friend that you know loves you, and to think, well, if my friend was going through this, what would I say to them? What challenges to this narrative in my mind would I offer to them? And so knowing that you love this friend and this friend loves you, but putting yourself in the opposite position can be much easier than just try to convince ourselves that we must be compassionate. So be a friend to yourself in that way. And again, I'm not saying it's easy. If we think of it like a skill to develop, it can take some of the pressure off. But to give ourselves time to do that. As I said, domestic abuse, it generally does not happen overnight. It is slow, over a long period of time. And in that sense, it can take some time to redevelop that sense of self-compassion, to really start meeting our own needs. Oftentimes, we lose a sense of what those needs even are. So even to identify them. But in general, one of the biggest points that many of the contributors to this program have shown is really that awareness that domestic abuse comes in many forms. And so to listen, if someone reaches out, to listen and to take on board what they're saying without giving advice per se, but being there for support.
Hi everyone, I am Sinead from Brador. I'm from Johannesburg, South Africa. Please join me in my Power Hour every Sunday, 12 o'clock Pacific Standard Time on E360 TV. Mwah!
Thank you, Meg. And as you can see, we have new experts in. We've got a different panel in joining us. Joining Ronia and myself, we have Jude, who is a familiar face on mental health matters, and we have Dr. Stephanie Fitzgerald. If you both don't mind introducing yourselves and just saying a little bit about your link to domestic abuse and how you can provide the support that our viewers will be looking for. So Dr. Stephanie, over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I work as a clinical psychologist, but I also work as a health and wellbeing consultant for companies, really showing them how to take best care of their employees. So that's my link here.
Fabulous, thank you. And of course, Jude, we do know you, but...
Hello, I'm co-presenter with Audrey on Wellbeing Matters, and I have a little bit of personal knowledge of domestic abuse as well through friends.
It's one of those really difficult subjects, and this half of the show we're going to start looking at the things that the workplace can do and the things that we can do as friends and also as ourselves when it comes to healing. So we're going to go over to Lucinda Jones, who will reiterate that sometimes we need to wait it out as friends. Sometimes the only thing we can do is just be there until that person comes to us. But we're also going to hear her make some suggestions as how we can be better allies and be known as a safe space for someone to approach us. So over to Lucinda.
In domestic abuse terms, because interventions can create more problems. So remember, first of all, that survivors are the experts of their own lives. They are navigating a life that is so challenging because you're having to navigate something, your sense of danger constantly. You might have children that you're looking after. You might have different people that you are that you care for. It's very, very challenging. So what happens with perpetrators is that they can be quite, well, you know, they're not necessarily great people, are they? So you could, by speaking to a survivor and saying, I think or speak to a person and say, I think you might be a survivor of domestic abuse. I've witnessed this. I see him controlling you. I see him doing this. I see him controlling all the money and where you go, and you have been isolated from your friends a lot. I know what's happening here. I've read about it. I've seen this show. You are going through domestic abuse. Now, there's a whole host of reasons why that's not helpful, but most of all, you're possibly going to put that survivor into slightly more danger than they were in before. We don't want that. We don't want things escalating. We don't want her to be we don't want her making rash decisions either, because it can be quite extreme. And when we have these amazing organisations in place, so like Women's Aid and Refuge, they're in place because they are people who are experts in this, and they know, and we know, that the time that a survivor leaves a perpetrator can be a dangerous time. We know there's some really, really bleak facts that every 3 days a woman is killed by a partner or an ex-partner. It's a dangerous time. There needs to be a plan in place. There needs to be a plan for housing. There needs to be a plan for money. There needs to be a plan. And this is what our local our organisations do, that they help with this because they're knowledgeable about it and how to make it. So there needs to be a good plan. Also, she might not be ready to deal with this. She might know in her heart of hearts that actually this is the case, and she doesn't really know what to do, because the world is not geared up for people leaving, women leaving men. It's not. There's access. It was only 50 years ago that women were allowed credit cards without a husband signing off. 50 years ago was not long enough ago for that. So she's scared. She understandably, it is scary, but also she gets to decide. You do not get to decide this. It's so tempting to fly in and be the person that helps, that goes, I have spotted this, I will help, don't you worry, I'm here now. And that's not the case. This is not about you, this is about her. But the secret to it is to share information. So when I was saying how I've had 3 disclosures, these were 3 women already who were in my life, who I knew, like different levels, but like I'm still connected to. And all of them knew I was a safe person to speak to because I had been sharing about doing my training. I've been sharing about watching this TV show and how this is, and sharing this and this and this. And like when I did the Women's Aid, I'm 1.7 challenge last year. So actually I was raising money for their charity. So I was sharing that all at the same time as sharing additional information about things at the same time as well. So even when people don't interact, and generally speaking, they won't interact very much on social media when you do this, but you might have the right person seeing it at the right time and just clocking it and noticing, going, okay, so maybe she would know about this.Maybe she's the person to speak to. And that's exactly what I advise everyone listening to as well. Be welcoming to this information. I know it's hard. I know it's difficult. But if you're the person that someone's come to, she has had so much, she is so brave. She has spent so much time building up to talk to you about that. And we need you to respond in the most useful way, which is, I am so sorry this is happening to you. This is not your fault whatsoever. I thank you so much for coming to me. What would you like to do? What can I do? I'm aware of these different services here. Do you want me to come with you when you speak to them? These are the things that are really useful, and this is what survivors need from us.
Well, thank you to Lucinda. We're now going to go over to our stress consultant, Felicia Jones. Prior to her work, she used to work for a women's refuge project, and she's going to be talking to us about some of the experiences she's had there. Welcome back to the show, Felicia.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Audrey, and it's lovely to see so many of you. Hi.
Thank you for joining us. Now, we know you as our resident stress management trainer, but what was the work that you previously did with the Women's Refuge?
I do want to emphasise it was over 17 years ago that I worked for a women's refuge project. So in preparation for this, I actually reached out to an organisation, an amazing organisation in Milton Keynes called MK Act. And so they were able to give me a little bit of information about what's actually currently happening. And so, you know, we can share those in the show notes, and I'll talk about it a little bit later. But basically, I worked for a women's refuge project as a floating housing support worker. And what that meant, when you take that bit, the floating housing, it was really about women for a number of reasons who weren't able to be placed in a refuge, in a safe house. And so I worked with them with a variety of different ways. It could be anything from helping them to be rehoused, because when they left their situations, they would be classed as homeless, and so the local authority would have an obligation to look into their case. But it was so they could be in temporary housing while that happened, but it could take a while for them to be rehoused. So I was literally working with them and helping them and their children, in effect, through the period of actually being able to navigate that. How do I get some safe housing? How do I get somewhere that I can settle my children? So it could be, firstly doing the housing through a local authority, through private housing, through a housing association. But it could be really, practical things, particularly for women who are out of area, that how do I register for a GP here? How do I settle my children into schools, and what schools are available? And then making the contacts between social workers, or it could be, meetings with the headmaster to kind of explain the situation. And then some of it was, involved in court cases or mediation, kind of working through those processes. So it was really being there for the woman until she was resettled.
Gosh, there's an awful lot that goes into resettlement. So what would you say are the challenges, and what does it mean in reality?
We talk about resettlement as if it's just one of these things that you've been in a situation, then you go into another situation. But when you think about it, for all of us, where we live, our home, we decorate it, we furnish it in ways that make us feel comfortable. And even for women that are in this situation that's traumatic, it could be physical violence, it could be mental. They still have a place in their home. They have some form of community. It could be other parents at the school gates. It could be family. It could be friends. So when we're talking about actual resettlement, it's not simply that process of moving from a situation that's really traumatic into a situation that's safe. There's a lot of feelings. There's a lot of, things going on for a woman in that experience. And things can trigger her. So I mentioned MK Act and the work they did, but one thing I really want to emphasise is just the really phenomenal work that support workers do, because they're alongside the woman navigating this experience. They're not trying to push a woman into something she doesn't want to do. It's actually, navigating this difficult experience. And one of the reasons it's so important is because in that experience, women often return. And people that aren't actually working in that experience or don't understand it, don't understand why would you actually return to that experience. So that's coming back to, that whole thing that our home, our environment is somewhere that we feel comfortable. So even if women are going through these situations, they still have this home. So, actually leaving that is very traumatic. And so yes, just going back to the support workers are just a real vital lifeline to helping that woman kind of navigate that experience and the stress that they're going through.
I'm really glad you mentioned the support worker, because earlier in the show, one of our experts, Jennifer Mckenzie, she mentioned the importance of having an advocate with you. Do you mind sharing, as well as MK Act, what other organisations might be there that a woman can reach out to? Because there's so much she has to go through, and you're right, because it's not just jumping from one situation into another. There's schools to talk to, there's medical professionals, all of that change that needs to happen. So can you maybe give us some ideas of where she can get that support?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are more than 500 refuges in the country, but that's not enough.
No,
that's really, when you look at the situation, because they're homes, and there aren't enough of those. But within every area, there will be domestic violence support services. So there could be women's refuge projects, there could be women's aids, there could be organisations like EVE, independent organisations. There's also support that comes from the local authority. And as you mentioned, social workers becoming involved. And with these organisations like the refuge projects, they have within them lots of different courses and programs to support women. Just talking to MK Act and just hearing about some of the things that they do, just if I can just mention that, if that's okay on here, they have a a peer support, which is just so important, because often when women leave these situations, they have to tell their story. And that can be traumatic, telling that same story over and over again. So telling the story to people that are there to help, so like social workers or, you know, housing authorities or even the Refuge Project, but having a peer support group. So people that have been in the same situation, and these are led by women who have been in the same situation. It means that women fleeing these situations don't have to say a lot about what they're going through. They're just people who actually know. And so that in itself can help women just feel more settled in the area that they are. They also run a 12-week program. I think it's called the Freedom Program.
Yes.
And that's all about...
Jennifer mentioned the Freedom Program.
Yeah, it's all about supporting women in actually understanding about domestic violence and moving through that. And that might sound a strange thing. Well, you know, if you've been in this domestic violence situation, surely you know about it. But it could have been for an awful long time, and women not actually recognising all of the forms of abuse that they've been through and the repercussions and the long-term impacts that can have. So that can support them. And then there's another programme they have called ILAM. I think it's ILAM in the community. And that, I think, is just so important, because when I worked in the service years and years ago, it wasn't talked about that much then, and it's not talked about that much now. And this is all supporting women who are from ethnic minorities. And so all looking at the cultural impacts of violence and domestic abuse, and also sort of honour violence that isn't talked about. And in that situation, because it's not talked about, women can't talk about it and don't really, you know, get that opportunity. So I think that's another programme that they do. But there's organisations all around the country which are there to support and will be doing similar kind of things, not only when women are immediately fleeing from that situation, but actually, as I said, you know, when they're resettled. And that can be resettled a year later, 2 years later.
So there's a lot of support out there, but as you've said, going through this process can bring up trauma from a long time ago, or the trauma of what women are going through now and shortly afterwards. So how was the stress kind of that's brought about by that trauma, how can that be dealt with, and the uncertainty as well after resettlement?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you said after resettlement, because I think when you're talking about this situation, women and their children have been in survival mode all often.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Sorry, I just had some background noise there. So you know, the women in that situation will actually be in this trauma, this survival mode. So that's not the time to actually be dealing necessarily with all the stress response and all those things that are actually triggering them. It's at that time support, as I said, the support work is helping them to be settled. But then moving on from that situation of actually being resettled, that's the time that women can actually start thinking about the trauma, if they want to. Not every woman will want to actually look at the trauma and look at how they can help themselves and be healed and really understand more about stress and the triggers, because years later, you know, a woman, just anybody who's stressed will experience this. Somebody with a heightened stress response, they might hear something, might see something, and then there is always this fear of, I don't know if I'm going to be found. I don't know if I can trust people, even people in this community. So, you know, it's actually navigating through that. And so being resettled means actually being comfortable in your home and being able to start rebuilding a life. And for some women, they've never done that before.
Yes.
For some women, you know,
on their own as well.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. For some women, it's extremely different. That, you know, from the outside, everything looked good. They had a good job and a good life. And then they're in a situation of going to a new area and they're having to claim benefits. And they've never done that before. But particularly this whole having to create a new life when you've never done that before is particularly challenging. So in that situation, I think women are in that stress, in that heightened stress response for a long time. And it's not until maybe 6 months later, a year later, 2 years later, that they're ready to actually deal with the stress. And that's where, organisations have said, that supporting can come in and can do that.
No, and I'm really grateful that you've mentioned so many different places that people can access that support. Just before we let you go, Felicia, do you have any cases that particularly impacted you? Even though it was 17 years ago, there will be, because you're in that space, things can impact us as well, the support workers. So have you got any that particularly impacted you?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it from that point of view, as a support worker, you have supervision, supervision. And so you shouldn't be carrying this on your own. You should have somebody to talk to. We had peer supervision, we had supervision from a manager, and so weren't actually carrying these things with us. Although, you do take some of the stories. But the amount of stories that I heard, what really sticks with me is the tenacity, the strength, the courage of these women. Even when we had peer support groups, that often the women were able to smile, able to laugh, able to share good experiences, and that was so uplifting because you know that you're part of a process that women are going through. But I do remember particularly one woman who she just had such a traumatic situation she went through. She left with her children who were teenagers. It took a long time to help her be resettled, and one of the children wanted to go home, or where they'd lived before, so that was really, really challenging. Really tough. And when she was resettled in her home, eventually, I remember her saying to me, I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to turn this situation around so that some good can come out of it. And then I was still in touch with some of the women. I met her a few years later, and she'd actually enrolled to go to university and to become a social worker. So this isn't the story of everyone. Some of the situations are different, but that woman particularly, she wanted to turn it around. She'd had the support to be able to be resettled and to really start valuing herself and get back on her feet, and that was what allowed her to actually do something that she wanted to do.
Amazing. Oh my goodness, thank you for sharing that one, because it is so important to recognise that there can be a positive outcome, and it really doesn't always feel like that when you're going through it. So thank you so much, Felicia, and again, we'll see you on the show again soon.
You're very welcome. Enjoy the rest of the show.
Well, welcome back to our special on the topic of domestic abuse. Now, let's go straight in. Dr. Stephanie, the workplace can sometimes be the only place where women actually have a safe space to say anything, to be themselves, or to even potentially plan an escape. What sort of signs might we look for, and how can the workplace offer some help?
I think the workplace is really important because typically you're seeing people very frequently. So one of the signs you want to look out for is a change in behaviour. So typically that could be someone becoming more introverted, more withdrawn, but you can also spot some strange, if I could use that word, behaviours from partners. So one of the things about workplaces is it's very common to meet your partner at work, right? And so you may not only be working with someone who's being abused, but you may also be working alongside an abuser. And so you have to bear that in mind. So the ways that workplaces can support are recognising changes in behaviour. Typical signs and symptoms may be something like someone becoming flinchier, their startle response, that sort of threat response that you see in people, but also unexplained injuries, wearing inappropriate clothes for the season. So if it's the height of summer, maybe not in the UK, but typically the height of summer, and someone's wearing a thick roll neck jumper, long sleeves, they look like they're getting very hot, but actually they're not taking any layers off. It could be that they like wearing those clothes, it could be that they're hiding an injury. So typically changes are what you're keeping an eye out for.
I just want to pull out the point that you made there, that you could be working alongside the abuser as well. That scares me. So is there any way of being able to work with that person separately to bring that person out of the work context where their abuser might be there?
Yeah, I think it's really important. So I think as psychologists and, working with people, it's drummed into us about confidentiality. We probably all have secrets we will take to the grave that people have told us, right? Workplaces thrive on gossip. And so I think what's really important is that if you have a concern about an individual or about their relationship, you address that with the person. You don't go to their partner and say, do you know what, Steph doesn't seem herself, or something's up, or they're being very quiet, or oh, they were slagging you off last night. That is not the way that you want to approach it. If you have a concern with an individual, you need to approach it with the individual, and you need to think very carefully, because what could be a very valid concern could very easily become office gossip.
That's true. That's a very good point. And that relates to my next question for yourself, Jude, because you work within a parish council. So communities, again, could be a source of support, but they could also turn into the place of gossip and making things worse. What can communities offer?
Yes. Well, I think very similar to what Steph was saying was if noticing people whose behaviour has changed. Maybe they don't go out as often, they're not as visible in the community as they used to be, or the way they treat people is different. And communities also include kind of groups of friends or families as well. So, for myself, we noticed a friend whose behaviour was very, very different, and she was very insular, didn't go out anymore, we didn't see her for months on end. So it's just noticing the differences. Parish council, is an interesting one, because generally they're in villages where people do tend to know each other, and so people do notice if that person's milk hasn't been taken in for a couple of days, or like Steph said, if they're wearing, this has happened not in the parish council that I work for, but in a village that I know, where somebody was wearing a coat in the summer, and it just seemed very kind of strange behaviour. So there are those differences and nuances to take notice of, but then investigate further. It's a bit more difficult. I think in a workplace it's more structured, you've got the management and you can then speak to an employee. In a community, who does that? Who makes the first move if somebody is worried about somebody else?
Yes.
It's a bit more difficult.
And so, back to you, Ronia, what sort of services would be most useful? Because, as you say, when you do escape, it can be a life or death situation. Sometimes the workplace or your community doesn't have a clue because you've hidden it so well.
Yeah. Or the abuser is part of the community, right? And then they are smear campaigning, and so, which is another thing to do. When we suspect something, to take everything that's being said about that person with a grain of salt, because obviously an abuser will really turn everything around to make the victim look like the crazy one. And so that's also very important when we talk about communities, because it's about isolating the victims, so the community support actually falls away when it's most needed. But from services, I mean, there are services available. First of all, if you're not quite sure whether you're not in an abusive relationship, well, actually, if you're asking yourself that question, you already know the answer, really.
That's true.
But we always find excuses. It's very easy to find excuses, but as I said earlier, if something feels wrong, it's because it is. So it's very important to do your research. And there are services available, not only for women, there are safe houses for men as well. There are resources for LGBTQ, and they may not be as common as just women's support. However, they are out there. So whatever it is that you're looking for, really do your research and make a plan to keep yourself safe. That's the most important thing, keeping yourself safe. And we always feel like we are in severe danger. In many cases, it's not really the case. It's just what was instilled in us, and it's part of the illusion. But of course, there can also be situations where, and we've seen it happen over and over again, it really is a life and death situation. So really make sure to put the safeguards in place so you cannot be found. And then we have women's support, we have refuge. They have a lot of resources online. You can work out a structured escape plan with that kind of help. If you go, for example, to Boots, they have confidential corners where you just basically let them know this is what you're here for, and they offer support. So obviously it's very strategical planning, but it's important to understand that there is actually help that is available, because when we come out of an abusive relationship, it is all about the logistics. So at that point, you're highly activated, you're not functioning normally, which, by the way, is normal. There's nothing wrong with you, you're just dealing with an incredibly abnormal situation. And it really is about getting the logistics straight. So you very much need to stay in your cognitive function. Later on, when you do your healing, you come out of that. But in that particular part of the journey, use the resources, and it's absolutely okay to ask for help, because usually people like us, we're just so used to fighting our own battles.
Yes.
Right? So it's absolutely okay. The help is available, and please use it.
Relating to that, it's in the workplace. You've had, maybe somebody's made a disclosure and they don't want to stop work because it is the place that they're feeling very comfortable in. But of course, that needs extra support. What sort of thing can a workplace do? Because they're going to be undergoing a lot of stress. They might have to leave early for children. There's so many different things that are going to go on. They may not even be living where they would normally live. How can a workplace be more sensitive?
So definitely flexibility. Flexibility is going to be your watchword, because exactly that. Maybe previously someone was driving them to work, maybe now they don't know how they're going to get to work, maybe they need a later or more flexible start or end time. I think it's really important that we don't ask too many questions in the workplace. So when I've had disclosures, I don't ask for proof or evidence of a situation. I don't want, if I've had a disclosure, I respect that disclosure, and your main watchword, your main question is, what do you need? What do you need in this moment? We'll worry about longer term, we'll worry about everything later. In this moment, today, are you safe? Who's looking after you? Who knows where you are? But you only keep those questions confidential between you and that person. So it is not the case of, don't worry, I'll report it to HR, I'll let everyone know, I'll let the team know. No, complete opposite. It is, what do you need today? I would say as a manager, be quite robust. If anyone else in the team says, oh, how come Steph gets to go home early? You know, you're just there saying, because she does. You know, you're quite robust, you're quite sort of cutthroat about it. But I think something else that's really helpful is to not wait for disclosure before you do things like advertise your domestic abuse policy within your company. You can be a small family-run business, or you could be a massive global organisation. Have a policy. Organisations like Business in the Community and the UK government website have domestic abuse policies that companies can use. And really what you're saying is, as a business, we won't stand for this. We have zero tolerance around abuse. We will support people. We will support people to get the help they need. All you need to do is tell us. We are your safe space. And I think work, certainly during the pandemic, we really saw work was maybe the one safe space people had to come and be away from the home, be away from the place where they were facing abuse.
That's so helpful to talk about the policy and actually being open with that policy, just to tell people that this is, we're not having this, and this is an issue, and we understand it is an issue. So, okay, we've got that safe space. Maybe we, say, been resettled. I don't think settled is necessarily even the word there. Ronia, how do we start to put that pin in the ground and heal? How do we change that almost from the escape part into the recovery part, or do we ever do that?
Well, we have to do that. And I already touched on it. So everybody goes through the same motions when we deal with an abusive relationship, actually, whether that's at work or in families or in a romantic relationship, it doesn't matter. So, of course, first of all, as I said, you have to get the logistics straight, and there will be a big part of studying, getting all the information, because we're all brainy people. And just the realization that we were abused is so mind-blowing, and then it really, everybody needs to go through that phase of pretty much obsessively learning everything about abuse, narcissist, psychopath, trauma, the neuroscience of the brain. And I haven't met a single abuse survivor who couldn't write a PhD on this topic. So it's an important part of the journey. However, it is also important to get to the point to realize, okay, now I know everything I need to know. And I'm very intentionally not saying everything there is to know, because nowadays, every day somebody comes up with a new term and whatever. It doesn't matter. There will be a point where you know everything you need to know, and then it's really about shifting the focus away from what has happened, away from the abuser, and onto ourselves and our healing. And that's where we then take the step after realizing that everything that we've done actually hasn't helped us. We're still feeling pretty bad. We're still struggling with the mental health despite all of this in-depth knowledge. And that's where we then need to take it out of the cognitive function, because the damage that's caused is on such a deep level. The healing also needs to happen on a similar deep level. And obviously everything that's processed in the cognitive function doesn't give us the tools to actually access where we need to go. But the main thing is to make the decision, okay, so this is not my fault, obviously. However, the healing is my responsibility. And that has to be a very conscious decision to really go like, okay, I'm done reading up about it, I'm done watching all the videos. Now this is about proactive healing, practical things that I can do to actually reverse that brain damage that we mentioned earlier.
Yes,
right?
Yes, and relating to that, in the workplace, somebody may well have lost their confidence completely. They may be sort of thinking I'm useless, I'm not good at this anymore. How can the workplace, and this probably works not just for somebody who's been through such a horrendous experience, but how can the workplace begin to help us build our confidence back in ourselves, in our ability?
I think it's so important because work absolutely is one of those environments that can either really embed that belief or really challenge that belief. And so if I have someone coming to talk to me and saying something, you know, I may task them with something, they might say, oh no, I'm no good at that, I can't do that. My attitude is not, oh yeah, do you know what, you're right, I'll just do it, or I'll take it off you, or you'll probably, yeah, no, you don't want to do that. It's gently challenging that. So obviously I wouldn't force someone to do something they're not comfortable with. That's the last thing you want to do. But if someone says, oh, I don't think I'm very good at that, it's like, should we try it just between the two of us? And then if you hate it, we don't have to do it. But you're trying to rebuild someone's confidence. And I think particularly if you know that someone's been in an abusive situation and they've lost confidence, that can come out in all manner of things. So even things like organising the work Christmas do, they might say, oh, someone else needs to do the deposits, I'm no good with money. Maybe you're fine with money, maybe you're great with money, maybe you've just been told, oh, you can't deal with the cash. So how about I support you to do that? So I think it's patience, I think it's kindness, I think it's also gently challenging. Like I say, I would never put someone in, if someone said to me, God, I really hate public speaking, I wouldn't think, oh well, centre stage, off you go and do some stand-up, you know. But if someone said, oh, I don't think I'm good at that, it's like, why don't we gently challenge that and find out? And I do think work is such a good place to kind of safely fail within teams, because you've got teams there to support you, you've got a whole community, you're all striving towards the same thing. So it's almost, it can be quite a safe place to try things out and rebuild your confidence and maybe discover skills that someone's been telling you you're no good at, but you've never actually tried. And then you try them, and there's something beautiful about seeing someone blossom in the workplace with a new skill, with a new confidence, and thinking, do you know what, I've spent 20 years being told I'm no good at this, and actually it turns out I'm exceptional at this, and you think, yeah, you are.
Yes, and that's a great way of just gaining something of yourself back. Now, this is something we have mentioned before, and this probably applies greatly to friends and family who are outside the situation and not feeling it, they're just seeing it. Workplaces where there is almost that drive of, go do it, go do it, go do it. So I'm going to start with Ronia, and then we're going to go to Jude, and then Dr. Stephanie. It's about intervention and friends and family and wanting to support, and it's almost, if you've held back and you've not told them, oh, leave, but then they've come out of it, and then you're now going, why haven't you recovered? You're out of the situation now. It's so easy to almost think that. What can we say to friends and family to say, give it time?
Well, I mean, they need to understand that they cannot actually comprehend, unless it has happened to them, what horrors we have experienced. And there is always this major rift between family and friends and the survivor, because what the survivor says just sounds so dramatic, whereas other people just know it from the Netflix evening entertainment, right? But for the survivor, this is actually real life. And as with anything, mental health, unless you've experienced it yourself, it's very easy to just brush off. But what I think is for the survivor to understand that the disconnect exists, but it's nothing personal. They do the best they can with what they have, but they don't have the same understanding that we now have. We didn't have it before either. So it's not personal, but of course that doesn't make the experience any better, because you're so isolated, you're so alone in the darkest time of your life, really. But what I think it's important in this whole dynamic, as a friend or a family member, even if you don't understand exactly what's happening, and even though this person is very difficult to deal with and is not the person you used to know, just make sure that they know that you are a safe space without the actual intervention. And as we heard earlier, it's actually the only thing you can do is to hang in there until someone is looking for help. But then also don't give advice, because you don't know the situation, you don't understand the situation, and even if it's well meant, it actually causes more harm than good, and it creates this distrust, feeling misunderstood, feeling judged. So instead of that, you gotta just hang in there. And also, while the situation is still ongoing, never try to intervene, because you will always lose against the abuser, because it's part of the whole dynamic that's created, right, to isolate the victim. So even though you may be able to see from the outside what the situation is really about, it won't be received, because it feels like you are interfering in something you don't have any clue about. And then you get defensive, right? You go like, what are you telling me? You have no idea how amazing they are.
And it breaks that trust between you. Now that brings me on to you, Judith, because I know you've been on the support side of things.
Yeah.
How have you been able to kind of almost swallow that need to want to help and want to do something and hold back until they've really needed that and come to you?
It's really hard, actually. And in one case, I and a couple of other friends in the group held back until we couldn't hold back anymore. So we kind of, our friend was more and more isolated by her partner. She moved down, a couple of hours away. We never heard from her. But she kept reaching out, almost saying help. And then if we would speak to her, she didn't really want our advice, so it was very difficult. So in the end, we just got in the car and went to get her and her staff and literally extracted her from the situation, because there was nothing else we could do. She kind of wanted help but didn't want it, if you see what I mean. So that was probably inadvisable, but we did it anyway, and she didn't go back. But what she did do was, her future relationships were very similar. So that was a really difficult one to kind of see.
Because I guess that's why we would say that would be inadvisable, because I guess maybe she never had the chance to process and so on. But it is an we're just saying there's no right or wrong, there's no judgment. It's just, this is what people feel they have to do, and we feel driven to intervene.
Yeah.
Let's go to Stephanie about the workplace again. So now you've got the situation where somebody has disclosed workplaces being as supportive as possible. But what happens if the abuser is in that workplace? I know it's a really difficult question. And how do you navigate that? How do you manage that potential conflict?
So I think, again, it's knowing where your role is in the workplace, because you're not there as a mediator, you're not there to kind of jump in and try and rescue. You could make things so much worse.
Yes.
And I think it's really important to take guidance. As I say, there is some really fantastic support for employers who may be in that situation, or managers who someone may have disclosed, or they may have noticed something. So I've definitely been in environments where it was the partner's behaviour that was quite extraordinary. So if the team went for team drinks, they would invite themselves along, but they weren't in the team. And it was very clearly team drinks. So it would be a bit like bringing your children along, or bringing, your pets along. It was like, why are they here? And no one really questioned it until we did. And then even things like if that person was having a one-to-one over Zoom, the partner would be in the room. And it was like, why are they sitting in on your one-to-one, on your confidential work conversation? So you do have some of these sort of behaviours and things that you can notice. But I think in terms of that, trying not to jump in and problem solve, because we care as people, that's, it's recognising actually the kindest thing I can do now is ask the person what they need. They may not know, but I will say sometimes there are practical things that can come in. So we've certainly had workplaces with security, for example, that will take that person to their car. Wow. We'll take them to the train station. We'll watch them go to the car. So maybe they won't escort them, but they'll say to the person, we're keeping an eye. So if that person, particularly when they've left a situation, if that person happens to be waiting in a car park, just know that we'll see you, but we're not going to make it obvious, but we are watching. I've had groups of employees who all leave work at the same time together, maybe leave the factory together, all leave work together, all go to their cars together, so it doesn't look odd. You're not doing anything that's sort of putting a spotlight on that person and making them very uncomfortable, but what you are doing is saying, we've got you, whatever you need. But for me, the main thing is to not make assumptions, because it's so easy to go, well, if it was me, here's everything I do. And you say to yourself, you are making those assumptions from the point of view of someone who is cognitively well, who is not being abused, who is not terrified, who has not had their confidence, maybe literally kicked out of them. So I think it's really important that we stand back and say, I have no idea what I would do. You tell me what you need and I will support you. And for me, in workplaces, that's the bit that's quite difficult, because people want it dealt with, but also they don't want it to carry on, because we know statistically it's far more common than is ever disclosed. Sometimes someone else needs you to be okay because they don't want to be triggered or have their own stuff brought up for them. They don't want to address their stuff, so it's almost like, no, we can all just brush that under the carpet and pretend everything's okay. So it's always worth checking in and getting some advice and support if anything's coming up for you as well before you go and support someone else, because like I say, statistically we know it's around far more than is ever talked about. But I would really advise, if anyone is thinking, I'm really worried about someone on my team or someone's disclosed something, just reach out to organisations that exist that are there to support workplaces and to help and give you that guidance, so that you don't put your foot in it.
Yes, no, so important. We're going to go over to another guest who has given us their experience, but she's actually written a poem about her experience of abuse. Again, it's read by an actor, and this poem is called I'm Sorry.
I'm sorry for being sorry. I'm sorry for compromising my own values to make you feel better about the fact that you had none. I'm sorry for being in denial about the fact that you had been unfaithful. I shouldn't have done that. I'm sorry for bargaining our relationship and trying to cut you a deal that would cement over your deceit and instead keep us going. I'm sorry for believing that you didn't mean it and that it was just an oversight on your part. I'm sorry for thinking she meant nothing to you, and that if she knew how much she'd broken my spirit, she would apologise and disappear. I'm sorry for checking in with you to make sure you were okay. I'm sorry for trying to find a rational explanation as to why you would do that to me. I'm sorry you convinced me that my suspicions and distrust were all in my head, a result of past betrayals that I was dangerously seeping into our relationship. I'm sorry that you let me pursue 6 months of therapy to dispel those demons, which turned out to be my gut feeling telling me that you were up to no good. I'm sorry that you will never read this, whilst knowing you will also never deserve to either. I'm sorry to myself for never believing myself, for not trusting myself and all the second guessing. I'm sorry to myself for being sorry.
That was a very moving poem, and one of the things that struck me in that poem was that she says at the end, I'm sorry for being sorry. It's so heartbreaking. There's so many layers of complexity when it comes to abuse, and so any form of support, any form of even healing goes through so much. Really, we could do another 2 hours on this, but if there's anything that you can offer in terms of friends who are trying to help, workplaces that are trying to help, and the person trying to heal, what might you say? So let's start with Jude.
With friends, I gave you the example of the friend that we helped, in inverted commas, but we did learn from that actually, and we had another friend in a very similar situation, and that was offering help and support and saying, I'm here when you want me, just letting them know and reaching out, even though that person wasn't coming back very often, just letting them know that you're there. And that friend then kind of dealt with that in a different way, came to the realisation themselves, as you said, had the, closure's not the right word, but had the process, was able to work through the process. So that would be my my kind of takeaway, is do it that way and not the first way.
Thank you for sharing that you've been through that, because I think that's very difficult to do as well. So I'm really grateful that you did share that. Dr. Stephanie, workplaces, what can we do? What more can we do?
So I would say be consistent. So don't wait for disclosure. Don't wait till things are sort of really bad or acute before you raise these issues. Be clear about your policy. If you don't have a policy, get one.
Yes.
But openly and regularly raise, this is our policy on these issues, these are the support mechanisms we offer. Check in with your employees regularly. So those one-to-ones, those conversations, maybe sometimes asking are you okay to speak openly? Are you able to talk? Is now a good time? Those kinds of questions, because if they just become part of your narrative, you'll be more comfortable, right? Like asking those questions. But also it may be that you ask the same person the same question every week for a year, and on that last week they say, no, I'm not okay, this is happening. And what you've done is being consistent. You've consistently said, are you okay? I'm here. It's a genuine question. I'm offering a safe space. Is that consistency of safe space? And I think that's so important, rather than, it's your one-to-one annual performance review. Yes. Everything good? Great, on we go. And they're thinking, well, this couldn't feel less safe. I think, again, something that's really worth checking, if you're in a big global organisation or a bigger sized organisation, you probably have an employee assistance programme. It's making sure that they are equipped if someone calls to disclose, because again they are completely confidential lines. The company pays for employees to have access to help and support. It's often a specialist service that you can request. So just request it. It doesn't cost you any more in your EAP, but just request it. Make sure that people are comfortable advising. And again, share the EAP number regularly. It could just be part of your weekly update. Don't forget, if anyone wants to talk to anyone, they've got this free confidential helpline you can call. And again, maybe be prepared to give someone the space and the access to the phone so they can do that at work.
Yeah, and with the EAP, it's sometimes important to know that it's not part of the organisation, it's a separate body. That's really helpful. And then, Ronia, when you've gone through this, you have made the disclosure, it feels like this whole whirlwind, everything is happening, and then suddenly it's almost like you're starting to heal. That's it. You're left on your own. You now what, sort of thing. And that can be a setback as much as anything else. How can we continue that support for ourselves and healing?
Well, as I mentioned earlier already, it's important to get the right support, somebody who actually understands. And given that trauma, abuse, narcissistic abuse has become this buzzword, those buzzwords, and a lot of therapists and coaches have just added it to their offering without actually having the right knowledge, no specialist training, and definitely not the tools. It's really important to do your research on the support system that you're choosing, because if you have the right support and the right tools, you can and you will absolutely heal from that. So it definitely isn't a life sentence, and I think that's very, very important to understand, because most of us were written off as lost causes, including myself, and that's how I ended up doing what I do now, because I couldn't believe that there was nothing other than medication, and then finding a way to manage my symptoms. So I think I just want everybody to know who is going through the situation at whatever stage. This does not have to be a life sentence. And everything that you are experiencing, everything that you are feeling is absolutely valid. It doesn't matter what anybody tells you. There's nothing wrong with you. You're just dealing with an incredibly abnormal situation. So always remind yourself of that. Do your research. Ask for help. Get the right help, because that will make the whole difference, and really get to the point where you switch out of all the cognitive processing, because you may have already reached a point where you understand that this is not where the solution lies, and dive deeper, be curious, explore. We have hypnosis, we have NLP, we have somatic work. It's so multi-layered, and it's really about trying out the things that work for you, you put in your toolbox. And healing from trauma needs to happen on a deeper level, and also on a practical level. So it's all about practical tools that help us shift our focus, that actually make changes to the landscape of our brain, and it needs to become practical. So you've got to put the work in. Nobody else is going to do that for you, but the tools are available.
And I've asked Ronia to bring her books that she has written with those tools. I'm very big on bibliotherapy, and for me that's a great way of finding that you're not alone. It's also a great way of being able to work through without a therapist with you, without that extra support, and sometimes actually you just need the space to be able to do it.
This book is specifically designed to help you find back to you after narcissistic abuse in general, really, because this is a selection of really practical little tools that you can incorporate in your day-to-day life. This is not deep therapy, obviously. However, it's very practical, and you will be amazed how really small things can make such a big difference in how you feel about yourself, how you feel about the world, really finding back to yourself, because this is what we lose, right? When we experience abuse, everything that we thought we were is taken from us. So this is very particular, designed to help you do that. It's called Me, Myself, and I. You can get it on Amazon. And I know we've pretty much exclusively talked about the woman being the victim, the man, the perpetrator. In my experience, that's actually not the case. So I have one for men as well. And there's very little resources for men, and it happens to all of us. Like abuse is something that's really not discriminating against anything or anyone. And if you are at a point where you're kind of feeling stuck right now, you know everything you need to know, and you just need a little kickstart moving forward, this is a good start, at least, to build a bit of a foundation, and then you can build on top of that, obviously, with professional help.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to all our guests. Thank you so much to our experts. We had Madina Demirbas, who is a sex therapist. We had Jennifer Mckenzie, who is a somatic therapist. We've got Judith Crosier, who you know as my co-host. Dr Stephanie Fitzgerald, who is a workplace counsellor, psychologist, neuropsychologist as well, and Ronia Fraser, a narcissistic abuse recovery coach. And thank you so much for tuning in. If you want to get hold of any of our guests, we have got their links in the show notes, and we've also put in the links to all of the support network out there. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we will see you next week.